Sarah Bird, you are whitewashing the crimes of Microsoft in Palestine. How dare you talk about responsible AI when Microsoft is fueling the genocide in Palestine?
Microsoft has a major footprint in all technological infrastructure in the Israeli military. They are still the most trusted cloud provider, specifically for the Israeli military. Azure helps run combat and intelligence activities. It helps in the targeting systems as well. Microsoft storage, 13.6 petabytes of them are used to store data that's collected through illegal mass surveillance of Palestinians. Microsoft is complicit also in the apartheid system. There's this app called Al-Munassiq, which Palestinians have to use to manage the permits to enter and leave the West Bank. And that is also used to collect massive amounts of surveillance on the Palestinians, and that runs on Azure. Microsoft even sells technology and directly to illegal settlements in the West Bank.
Hey folks, welcome to Occupied Tech. This is a collab between Tech for Palestine and Palestine Deep Dive, where we'll be discussing the mechanics of the tech industry and how the tech industry powers Israel's genocide and apartheid and occupation. In each episode, we'll be looking at the companies, the investors, and the individuals in the tech industry's complicity in Israel's apartheid in Palestine. And most importantly, we'll be speaking directly to the people resisting this oppression. So I'm Paul Biggar, and I'm the founder of Tech for Palestine. Tech for Palestine is an incubator for Palestine advocacy. So that means that we're trying to start thousands, maybe tens of thousands of initiatives, whether those are nonprofits, startups, or simply groups of people to advocate for Palestinian liberation. You can find out more about our work, how to use our tools, and to volunteer for our projects or donate to support our work at techforpalestine.org. So today we are here, super excited to have the first guest in our series. It's Hossam Nasr from No Azure for Apartheid. So Hossam, do you want to give us thank you so much for coming. And also, do you want to give us a quick intro to Noaa?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Excited about this podcast. I'm Hossam. I'm an organizer with No Azure for Apartheid, or Noaa for short. And we are a worker-led group of Microsoft and employees who are demanding an end to Microsoft's apartheid and genocide. We launched our campaign formally about a year ago in May of 2024, and we have 4 basic demands. The main one being IUF off Azure, so ending the sale of Microsoft technology to the Israeli military and the Israeli government. Second demand is disclosing all the ties between Microsoft and the Israeli war machine. 3 is honoring the demands of a previous petition that called on Microsoft to call for a permanent and immediate ceasefire in Gaza. And lastly is just ending the discrimination and the double standard that affects Palestinian, Arab, Muslim, and allied employees of the company.
Very cool, very cool. So we're going to get a little bit into the specifics of Microsoft's complicity and how it works with the Israeli army. But I kind of want to start off with just sort of a very brief, is Microsoft evil?
Yeah, I think it's a good question because actually a lot of people think that Microsoft has been successfully able to cultivate this image as perhaps a more ethical, tech company. But I think not only are they, the answer is yes, not only insofar as any big tech company in this day and age is bound to be evil in some capacity, but Microsoft is also sort of especially evil in insidious ways that people don't realize, and it goes even beyond Palestine, like even before all of that. Microsoft has been the sort of technological backbone behind a lot of systems of oppression around the world that is just kind of operating silently in a way that people don't pay attention to. Namely, for example, Microsoft was also embroiled in the No Tech for ICE campaign a while back during Trump's first administration. That was a big deal, and Microsoft was also, not to mention Microsoft's business practices that predate all of these things around how they would, anti-competitive behavior, how they would acquire competition and immediately squash them before they get to actually compete in this sort of thing. But yeah,
this was my Yeah, I joined the tech industry in like the late '90s, and went to college around then, and like Microsoft was the evil company. Like the whole Linux movement was against it. Microsoft was
Hmm.
Internet Explorer 6 tried to crush the internet and bring it within its own box. And somehow they managed to sort of like revive that revive their image. Like Bill Gates is now like this wonderful philanthropist when he was
Yeah.
the worst person alive for most of my life.
That's right. And I think you're right. I think there was a very effective whitewashing PR campaign, not just, whitewashing Microsoft, not just Bill Gates' image, but Microsoft as a whole. The person who followed Bill Gates was Steve Ballmer, who remains actually Microsoft's biggest shareholder. But he is one of the most vile human beings on earth. And, he actually he was behind the very iconic phrase that Microsoft is as much an Israeli company as an American company,
Jesus.
and even internally within the company, like he's notorious for having cultivated this really toxic work environment and that sort of thing, and then comes Satya, and I think he actually becomes this driving force behind all of this whitewashing stuff, um, and he has his book is called Hit Refresh, right? He tries to go on this marketing or this effort to change Microsoft culture. That's a big thing. Like as somebody who joined the company, so after all of this, like I used to hear all the time about how Microsoft used to be so different, used to be so toxic and whatever, but now Satya has made everything better, and now everybody's happy, and like we don't do these things anymore. So I think he was actually effective in kind of leading that at the very least from the PR side, leading that effort. But you're right. I mean, Microsoft was involved and continues to be involved in so many antitrust lawsuits,
Hmm.
and sort of people forget about that all the time. And that's not to get obviously into the main topic of today, which is like now they are powering the world's first AI assisted genocide. The crime of all crimes, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. So the we're gonna get into all that later, but I'd love to talk about Noah specifically, and kind of what I'm trying to get at here is there's a lot of folks who want to set up an equivalent to No Tech for Apartheid, No Azure for Apartheid. One of these kind of like external worker groups. So like, I want a mental model of like what actually is Noah, like what's involved in running it. What does it mean to set up something like this? Just sort of what can you tell us about that for people who want to sort of follow in the footsteps here?
Yeah, totally. I mean, really, at the core, the heart of it, it's just a community of workers who are aligned on a few key principles, particularly that we refuse our labor to be used to facilitate the Holocaust of our time, to facilitate the genocide in Gaza. We believe that we initially were formed from a group of people who had given up on going through the so-called formal channels, trying to appeal to the humanity of the executives and just having meetings with them and that sort of thing, recognizing that there needs to be a movement or a force to actually pressure these executives instead of just trying to appeal to their humanity and take their words at face value. And lastly, a recognition that that can really only be effectively done if partnered with like an outside force. Like if we're not just working within the confines of the company limits on company platforms within company channels. Because Microsoft made it very clear shortly after the genocide that um, they are they are very willing to ignore any efforts that do just exist completely within the confines of those platforms. And even when they do start to cause headache, they will very quickly and easily change the rules or shut down the platform to allow it to not cause them any headache. So that's kind of the kind of the key part of it, was just recognizing first of all, the need to focus on Microsoft's business practices as it affects like actually the genocide in Palestine, not necessarily as much on you know their statements or that sort of thing,
Mhm.
the language that they use. but rather like materially, how are they contributing to the genocide? And then secondly, do it like confronting and pressuring against those practices in a way that combines work inside the company and the outside.
Mhm.
Um, but I think in general, once you have a group of people who kind of share those values and believe in those things, I think one of the things that made Noah as effective as it has now become was um, that we ultimately were a base building organization. So we are always trying to appeal to the workers. We're trying to get more people who are in the company to get involved. We're not just running an Instagram page, or we're not just doing protests in the streets that any org or any group can do. We do all of those things, but ultimately our main goal is to incorporate the labor angle in this as well. The people who actually write the code, people who make Microsoft run, uh, like that's our base, and that's our main one of the main things that we do. Um, and I think that allowed us to really be really effective in ways that maybe other groups who aren't focusing as much on that area aren't.
Mhm.
Um, and then being
No, no
consistent.
names shall be named.
Yeah, of course. I'm not throwing shade on any group, obviously. But I think that and it's all also much more challenging in different circumstances. It's not like other groups are not doing that, not of any fault of their own, but there are contexts people operate in which
Mhm.
companies can be extremely repressive or restrictive against that kind of work. So doing any sort of even base building could be a challenge, or they operate from like a smaller pool. Like let's say if only 1% of the company's workers are willing to organize and join a group like this, but you're drawing 1% from a pool of 10,000 workers. That's going to be a
Mhm.
much smaller pool than if you have like hundreds of thousands of workers in the case of Microsoft globally.
Mhm.
um, and I think so. Yeah, there's obviously different contexts that make the organizing harder. But I think the other thing that's also really important is to be consistent.
Mhm.
And so a lot of the things that I saw happen shortly after the genocide is like a lot of people get really activated and really move to do something, and then you see a lot of group chats pop up, a lot of initiatives happen. Um, but how do you channel that into an infrastructure that is sustainable and is effective long term beyond the initial spike
Mhm.
of emotion, and actually building a sustainable organization? I think that's one of the things that was really important for us.
Mhm.
So even things honestly as simple as having a consistent weekly meeting time, or setting up an infrastructure for you know like leadership or some kind of organization, and that adds a lot of overhead, and sometimes it can feel like it slows down the work that you're trying to do. But it is really important to just ensure that there is continuity. There are people responsible for certain things, and they're kind of accountable to their peers, and there's follow-up on things and that sort of thing, instead of just ending in a group chat that has a lot of energy initially, but then it could very easily just die off when the
Yeah,
energy fades.
I think this is something that we consistently see from organizers. They'll put together like group chat with a lot of people who are super excited. It'll be like 60 people, and then it ends up being five people doing the chatting and two people doing the work.
Yeah.
And that's like a really tough situation. So are you organized into like, do you have like committees? Do you have sort of leaders of specific areas? Like how is it? I don't know if structured is the right word, but like how do you in a very literal sense organize?
Yeah, I think it's fluid. I think we try to also strike a balance between like structure and like I said, having consistency and accountability and that sort of thing without too much rigidity in how we organize. And honestly, we're always evaluating. Like, I'm not sure if the way we're doing it right now is the best way to do it, but we do have like a leadership team, um, and it's kind of like a small group of people within the organization who've been there, longer or have more capacity and interest in having that higher level of responsibility. And then we also have our different sort of committees or work streams, however you want to call it, and people are assigned to like lead each of these, and anybody can participate in any group that they want to be part of. But the leaders are sort of responsible for just driving the work forward, making sure it gets happened, and then we get together, once a week to just report back on everything, and then like do a sort of we collectively decide on important decisions. We vote on proposals and that sort of thing to ensure that also everybody feels like they have a stake in the org, and it's not like you were saying, it's even if there is a leadership team, it's not the leadership's org, right? It's everybody, and everybody has a say in how we do ourselves, how we do our work, and how we conduct ourselves.
So when you started Noah, like what was the actual process of going from like zero to there's actually something here?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it was a very slow, kind of painstakingly slow process, and it's like even when I think back at it, it feels like we spent almost a year. Like, sometimes I look back, I was like, what were we even doing during the whole year? But it was a lot of important work that was happening in the background. So the way it started is initially there's this internal group in Microsoft called Palestinians and Allies at Microsoft, and that's a sort of company sanctioned employee network for people who are just care about Palestine or Palestinians in the workplace. There's people with all sorts of risk tolerance and willingness to confront in that group, but I think there was an initial group of people, myself included, who felt like especially moved after the genocide to act on those key things, like I mentioned, confronting the leadership, putting pressure from the outside, and focusing on Microsoft's actual material contribution to the genocide. um, so that initial group of people, which was just a handful of workers at the time, we just moved over to Signal, started talking about what could this, thing that we're trying to do be. We actually had a few initial thoughts before like arriving at what we ended up doing. We thought about, being a part of PAM, Palestinians and Allies at Microsoft, and just be their sort of external wing of sorts, but we realized that that probably like adds more problems to them than they want to deal with, and more shackles to us from being able to just like be as loud as we want to be. So we didn't move with the option. The other thing that we talked about was just being part of the No Tech for Apartheid campaign, and we started working with or talking to No Tech for Apartheid leadership and figuring out what does that look like, what does that mean. I think that's what we ultimately went with. So for a long time, we just became like Nota at Microsoft. Um, and I think at first it was still basically just a handful of Microsoft workers with a few organizers from Nota giving us guidance and that sort of thing for and just in a Signal group chat. And we spent some time sort of trying to figure out what does a nota at Microsoft mean, identifying potential targets, honing on the campaign demands, the structure, doing more base building, just getting more workers involved, that sort of thing, until we eventually, by May of 2024, we had arrived at our campaign name, like no Azure for Apartheid, our main demands, like I mentioned. We had done enough research to publish our first report, which was called Marriage Made in Hell, that summarized what we knew at the time about Microsoft's complicity in Israeli apartheid and genocide, which is a lot less than what we know now after new investigations came out. And then we launched our petition, and we had our first action, which was targeting Microsoft Build in 2024. And then from that point on, I think it was still in my like for me that was one of my biggest fears, actually, was still feeling like this is going to be like a temporary thing, or this is going to be like just a group chat, people in a group chat. And I think just very slowly over time, we started building more capacity, more consistency. More people started to join. That allowed us to expand sort of our committees, our work streams, that sort of thing. Until we, I think, for me, it felt like a big turning point was October 24th, 2024, specifically when I got fired. Myself and another organizer, Abdo, who were fired for organizing a vigil. And just honestly, just even putting the vigil together, which was our first action, our first thing to ever do on campus, on Microsoft's campus in Redmond. But also seeing how much, people came together afterwards. The fact that people were even more interested in joining Noah afterwards, not less, and people were moved to join and not scared like Microsoft wanted them to be, and how just the campaign was able to mobilize to react to something like this that we didn't expect and we hadn't faced before.
Mm-hmm.
That to me was like super heartwarming, and that was one of the first times where I became convinced like that this we have, like you said, built something real here.
Mm-hmm. So that it's really interesting. Like, and I want to get back to like, let's focus a little bit on sort of Microsoft and its complicity. Like, you talked about the formal channels that you went through, and you talked about being fired. Um, one question I have is why is Microsoft doing this, right? This being the
Mhm.
whole thing, but why did they fire you? Like, and I don't just mean like what was the stated reason, but like what was happening behind the scenes that made Microsoft think this guy Hossam is going to be a problem for us?
Yeah, so two really good questions. I think in general, why is Microsoft doing this? I think it's a mixture of a few different reasons. Um, in my opinion, the most important one is ultimately that it's a profit-seeking organization, and in the world, in this evil world that we live in, like the capitalist system that we live in has assigned so little value to Palestinian life, so that it's actually profitable and not morally bankrupt to be profiting from the genocide of Palestinian people. And Microsoft is simply doing an economic calculation of it's more profitable to be engaging in this and profiting from this than to not, and the reputational and ethical damage that comes from it is not enough to offset that cost. So we're going to do it because we are profit seeking, and this is the equation that we're trying to disrupt. We are trying to make it, you know, cost like more costly to engage in those activities. It is morally bankrupt. It is reputational suicide, and it is the war crime that it should be, and not just business as usual. I think that's the main reason. I think there's other important reasons, including the fact that I wouldn't be surprised that there are people in Microsoft leadership and very high levels of decision making that are ideologically Zionist and
Mhm.
ideologically committed uh, to the continuation of the settler colonial project, that has shown, in the words of some Microsoft executives, particularly I'm thinking somebody like Charlie Bell, who is the head of Microsoft Security, and he was, Microsoft Security actually has so much operations in their Israel offices, so he has that very close relationship with the Israel office, and he was the first to from Microsoft leadership to come out very shortly after October, like pretty much on October 7, I believe, and say like on behalf of Microsoft, we stand with Israel.
Mhm.
Um, that
So
that's one
they
person that I
actually
think
said
is
we stand with Israel.
word for word. Yeah, that
Mhm.
was Microsoft's statement on October 7, and then amplified in the next few days afterwards by other leaders, including the CEO. But the
At any
first one to
point,
say it was
have they rolled that back in any way, saying, we don't support genocide. We thought we were saying something else. Has there
no.
been anything?
Nothing at all, and this is despite so many people calling that out at the time. Like I was saying, this is what I was alluding to earlier, where initially after October 7, so much of the energy of like worker organizing or employee activism felt like it was directed towards that. Like, you
Hmm.
know, you saying we stand with Israel, you standing with Israel as they're committing genocide right now? Like, why did you not mention Gaza? What about your Palestinian employees? You talked about the support that you're giving to your Israeli workers. What about your Palestinian and Arab workers and that sort of thing? These were all like really really good things to call out. I mean, their statement didn't mention Palestinians once. They're the original one, that we stand with Israel. Eventually, a couple days later, they released an updated one that, in my opinion, was even more insulting, because they did mention Palestinian employees once in one sentence, along the lines of, we have we have Palestinian employees who are concerned for the safety of their loved ones and condemn these terrible acts of terrorism, or something like
Mm.
that. Yeah,
They,
so
they
they
put
had,
words in your mouth.
yeah, and they had to qualify, the most mere
Mm.
recognition of the humanity of Palestinian workers by them condemning by them
Right.
condemning what they call terrorism. But
It's like forcing every activist to answer the question, like, do you condemn Hamas?
yeah, and and conditioning any recognition of humanity on the answer to that question. Um and that also failed to mention, like, the actual Palestinians were being genocided
Mm.
by, yeah, by Microsoft technology, in part. The statement wasn't mostly about Israeli employees. It was mostly about, we stand with Israel against these terrible, horrific, like, awful terrorist attacks and whatever.
Mhm.
And they used very sort of the kind of language that you would see all over Western media at the time, of, like, these horrible, senseless, yeah.
Mhm. And speaking of the sort of like context, had you but before October 7th, what was Microsoft's sort of like view, if they had publicly expressed one? Had they been against occupation? Was that something that they didn't stand for?
They would never go that far. But
Hmm.
I will say, and this is one of the reasons I think a lot of people were shocked, by Microsoft's initial reaction. Their track record on Palestine was not the worst compared to other big tech companies, and that's recognizing that's a very low bar. But for example, I mean, Microsoft has this, um, human rights statement that they're really proud of. They commit
Yeah.
themselves to abiding by the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. They say they don't allow their technology to be used for any violations of fundamental human rights, and that sort of thing. And that is something that is championed by Microsoft leadership, externally a lot. It's like we were saying, this. I think it was part of this attempt at rebranding and whitewashing that happened.
Hmm.
um, and they had a precedent in 2022, I want to say, of actually divesting from an Israeli,
Any.
facial recognition company, Anyvision, yeah,
Yeah.
um, after a sustained pressure campaign.
Hmm.
Um,
That was a really good outcome. Like when, like I don't know if you saw this, but like last year, Anyvision sold, and it sold for like a third of the money that it had raised. And the reason that, like, selling for a third of the money that it raised, it sold for, I think, 125 million. It raised 375. So their investors lost two-thirds of their money. And one of the major reasons was that Microsoft pulled out of that strategic partnership at that time. And so like that was a real sort of like signal to investors that if you're investing in this sort of like occupation technology, that you may lose all your money, through through the optics of it, or through the human rights of it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, and I think that was a sort of it was a precedent-setting move for Microsoft. As far as I'm aware, it was the first and only time where they have used this, human rights angle to pull out of something, or to make any sort of action as it relates to Palestine. Um, Obviously, they didn't cite, actually, but I'm not sure people know this. They didn't actually cite the fact that it's going to be used for apartheid or occupation in their official reason for why they decided to pull out. They said that it was just because we decided that actually investing in any sort of facial recognition AI goes against our values.
Hmm.
So we're not going to do it at all, which is fine if that's what they want to claim. Um, but ultimately, it was because of a pressure campaign that's, interestingly, was a lot smaller in magnitude and damage than the campaign we have today. I think that speaks to the change in the times, but also it was a big deal at the time. Like I don't think people who launched the campaign expected it to work that
Mhm.
quickly, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think when I first joined Microsoft, like I was never under the illusion that they are this sort of ethical company that they claim to be, but I did not realize the extent of their, you know, entrenchment in the Israeli war machine. So when I just Googled like what's Microsoft's relationship to Israel or their stance on Palestine and stuff like that, when I joined the company in 2023, or sorry, 20 I joined the company, yeah, 2021. So it was after I joined, but um, I went. That was one of the things that I googled, and one of the things that came up when I googled Microsoft's relationship, and I was like, it's still not illusion that they're ethical. I'm like, they shouldn't have invested in the first place. But I was like, okay, like maybe yeah, they really aren't as evil as other companies. I'll give them that.
Mhm.
And now it's very different.
Mhm. Yeah, I think a lot about how the acquisition of GitHub helped sort of their image, especially among folks. You're a developer, right? So like folks in the sort of coding world, the company that got GitHub suddenly got like a nice sheen to it. Um, before that, it was very, it might have been like less evil, but it was still the company that made like Windows and Office and Azure, which was widely regarded as the worst cloud out there.
Yeah.
So yeah, they kind of got to put a lovely rosy little respectability on themselves for the low price of 7.5 billion.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think there is. I did have maybe like a slightly different perception of Microsoft just puts out shitty products that
Mhm.
is able to dominate through sheer force of, you know, monopolization of the market, name recognition. Like Azure, for example, like I still am baffled like why anybody would want to use Azure. But it's
It's
just
bad technology.
these yeah, exactly. Like even from a technological perspective, like I wouldn't use it
Mhm.
just for purely based on the technology. But I think it is a lot of it is just the name recognition and this like really huge, institutions and institutional partners that just have a really long history with Microsoft and they see Microsoft, they think it's it's really the industry standard.
The amount of developers I've spoken to have been like, we've been forced to use Azure because either they offered us a lot of credits, like startups
Yeah,
used to be able to get a lot of credits on Azure relative to, like, at the time Amazon was giving you 20,000 credits, Azure would give you 500,000. um,
wow,
and also like these sort of big tech, like we've been Microsoft customers forever, so we bought an Azure package or whatever, and the developers like, this is the worst piece of shit ever. And I don't think it has gotten better. Like, certainly reputationally, Azure has not gotten better in the last few years. That you know is, um, I mean, I guess they're focused on sort of um, helping Israel instead of actually making the cloud a helpful product. Okay,
yeah.
so you
I
talked about.
think just one last thing on this actually, like just a really funny sort of side note. I think another piece of hot garbage is Teams, and there is this really funny quote in Job Site News of when they announced the fact that Microsoft was a BDS target, and Abdo, and one of the people at Noah was quoted as saying that like I yeah, you should also boycott Teams, although I'm not sure if anybody ever uses Teams willingly. And then the editors of JobSite were like, JobSite was not able to independently verify if anybody has ever used my Teams willingly, but experts say it's unlikely. And that always makes me chuckle. It's really
Mhm.
funny.
I've gotten sent a couple of Teams meetings, and it's surprising how much worse a tool it is just from a UI perspective. Like, the first thing it does is ask me my name, and it's like, why don't you know my name? You've asked me like 4 or 5 times. Every time you ask me my name, like, what's going on here? Even StreamYard that we're using remembers who I am.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, no, I've worked at Microsoft for like 3 years and interned for a summer before that, and I never stopped disliking Teams.
Okay, so I do want to ask about you specifically, because one of the things that you mentioned is risk tolerance,
Yeah.
and risk tolerance. to me is the number one thing in the movement. Like Israel has made it very risky, and so
Mhm.
you have a lot of people who are in the movement who just got there because they're able to tolerate that risk, and it's true for me
Mhm.
as well. Like I'm not the only founder who suddenly discovered Palestine and was like angry about it. I was
Mhm.
just the one who was in a good position at the time and also had like really high risk tolerance. Um, so like, I mean, who are you? Like, where are you from? What do you do? Where do you work? Like, what you're a software engineer? Like, what do you code?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Egypt. I think that was one thing that played a big role in my upbringing. Actually, was like witnessing the Arab Spring when I was like 11, at that transformative age, and it was around the same age also that I realized my passion for computer science, as corny as that sounds today. So believe it or not, I actually went to down this career path out of actual passion and not out of good money or whatever. And I think because of that, I realized that I wanted to study abroad. I set my sights on the US, not just because they're leading in this field, but also because they had the most generous financial aid for international students. So it was, probably one of the only affordable options for me to study abroad. And then I came here for college. So about 8 years ago, studied CS for 4 years, and then graduated and had my first job out of college when I first moved to Seattle. So yeah, in October 2021. I did do organizing in college. In the 4 years that I was there, I was part of my school's version of SGP, like Students for Justice in Palestine. But I think, and then that was driven mostly because, I mean, I knew I was always, that was always a cause that I cared about. But especially what drove me to organize around this in particular was just the hypocrisy that I saw, and witnessing firsthand the you know progressives except for Palestine, the Palestine exception to free speech, that sort of thing. It just really angered me. Something really angered me about that hypocrisy, that double standard, and I I felt called to do something about it. And back then, organizing for in the college setting was very very different than what it looks like today. Back then, like even passing a divestment resolution felt like the golden star, like the North Star to work towards. And it felt unattainable at the time. And I graduated before it happened. Um, Now it's, like that's step zero of like the most basic, non-risky thing you can do in college organizing, which is, you know, I think also speaks to how sentiment has shifted in this country and the urgency of this moment. I think back then, the questions around risk tolerance for me, it was nuanced because I thought there was a balance at the time between actually speaking up and like using the platform that you do have. I felt like just by virtue of me being in the US and like studying at one of its most prestigious schools, that alone give me a platform and a privilege that so many people in where I come from, so many people in Palestine don't have. So that came with an obligation to like speak up, while also feeling like that should be balanced with um, not putting it all there, like not risking my career, not risking being deported, not risking that sort of thing, so that I can have even more privilege later on, or I can stay in this country to have even more impact later on. I thought there was a balance between these two. I think for me, that balance completely broke down after October 7th. Like just realizing early on that this was an existential battle for the survival of the Palestinian identity, recognizing that this was truly what was unfolding was a genocide, and Israel made it very clear their intentions and their aspirations to completely wipe off the population in Gaza, and feeling like this really is the Holocaust of our time. This is the defining moral question of our time. I was like, at this point, if there is any room for this like save myself for later type mentality, that is just cowardice and self-interest, not out of actual desire for more impact. Because I was like, if there could no longer be a Palestine to fight for or Palestinians to uplift, 10 years from now if this genocide is allowed to continue. So I was like, I was still, on visa at the time, and I was already on Canary mission and that sort of thing. But I was like, it doesn't matter. Like any caution I had, or any, if there's any privilege I was saving, like it's time to put it all on the line now. Um, and that's what made me, like, to your point, like, become very, very vocal
Hmm.
early on in the genocide. And going back to your earlier question about why did Microsoft fire me, I think that was part of the reason, is because I became really, even within Microsoft, even before I was fired, I was talking publicly to the media about Microsoft's complicity in the genocide. I
Hmm.
was very vocal on internet platforms on calling out, their business practices, calling out their hypocrisy, calling out their discriminatory and racist practices targeting Palestinians, Arabs, and Muslims. I think they tried many ways of getting rid of me by weaponizing HR investigations, or at one point getting my manager to try to get me to quit afterwards, and even suggesting I should take some, he can reduce my workload so I can have time to interview for other jobs and that sort of thing. And I think when all of that didn't work, they felt forced to fire me, and they used the sort of visual as their opportunity, their pretense to actually do it. And that was in part also driven by so much Zionist pressure from the inside. So again, to your question, like, why does Microsoft do this? I think that's another big part of it, of
Yeah.
these
So
internal,
to
yeah.
tell us about that, like, what the you mentioned that Bomber had, had said like this is an Israeli company. What one of the stories that I heard from an activist at Microsoft sort of years ago was that they had gotten a conversation with one of the bigwigs. And they sat down for like some time, telling them about, like, here's what's happening with the occupation and the West Bank and that sort of thing. And what they said is like, I actually know all of the things that you're telling me, and
Mm,
I simply don't care. And so I'm stuck between this, like, you know, are they sort of like evil capitalists or evil Zionists? But it
mm.
seems maybe there's a smattering of both. Is that kind of how you see it?
I mean, like I said, I think I see them. They're mostly, the main driving force is their evil capitalists. If the forces of capitalism were to pressure them into divesting, they would divest.
Hmm.
There is a part of it in which they are also evil Zionists, and there is a part of which I think, similar to how you see, politicians here, who, even if they privately, secretly know that this is wrong, there's just so much pressure from APAC and those lobbyist groups that they just are forced to fall in line, and there's not enough of an incentive for them to have a spine. I think there is similar forces here as well. I think to a lesser extent, but there is sort of internal Zionist lobbying within the company that is more impactful than, Pam, for example. They have leadership's ear more than Pam does, and they do exert a lot of pressure, and they were exerting a lot of pressure, for example, to get me fired by name, because I think, by virtue of the fact that at that time, at least, I was one of the only Microsoft workers who were willing to speak on the record to media. um, they had the false perception that me and Noah were like interchangeable. So like all the things they saw online that Noah was doing and putting out, they were like, "Oh, that's just Hossam. Like we need to like take him down, right?" Similarly for the visual also,
Hmm.
and I saw like there was a lot of pressure on the company to shut down the visual before it happened, and they eventually complied. I mean, that's why they tried to shut it down the day before, even though they knew about it
Hmm.
before that, and ultimately used that as a pretense to fire me.
So when they're doing this sort of suppression internally, the one thing we always hear is this sort of like weaponization of anti-Semitism,
Yeah.
and trying to say that anything that's complaining about Israel is anti-Semitic. Was that lobbied at you?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, all of them. And I was in a way actually convicted of this. I mean, I was investigated by HR for 3 months,
Mm-hmm.
for simply writing a comment that said Palestinians deserve freedom from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and at, at the conclusion of that 3 months investigation, I was actually found to be in violation of Microsoft's anti-harassment and anti-discrimination policy on the basis of religion, ethnicity, and national origin. Basically, like I'm discriminating against Jewish people and Israeli people.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and that actually came with severe sanctions. Like they,
Did
uh,
they tie those together? Like did they say specifically this phrasing does this and does this, or was it
yeah,
just okay?
it was very explicit. It was very explicit. Like your choice of those words, like saying from the
From
Jordan
the
River to
river
the
to the
Mediterranean
sea,
Sea,
presumably.
you are calling for the genocide of, or you are calling for like to kill all Jews or in Israel or the
Did they have
extermination.
a reference to that, or was it just like their, I don't know, their opinion, or like it is well known, or like were they like here's a thing that we use to resolve these things?
No, and they failed to ever cite that. I mean, their angle was Jewish employees have complained about this comment and they have said that this is blah blah blah. What's your defense, right?
Mm,
And they didn't even allow much room for defense either. Like they came at me very hostile, cut me off, like didn't even let me explain. And when I would like explain like what that term actually means, they were like, "Oh, you're just invalidating your employees' concerns. You're not actually listening." You know, I mean, in fact, they were the ones not listening. And
mhm,
and the insane irony of it all is there was a different person on the same platform that wrote a comment that said, "Between the river and the sea, Israel will forever be." I reported that comment and I explained like whatever standard you want to use to claim
mm,
that Palestinians deserve freedom from the river to the sea is calling for genocide or extermination or whatever of any people. If you apply the same standard to this comment, that one is actually so much worse, because what does Israel between the river and the sea means? Israel that is, unlike Palestine, defined explicitly as a Jewish majority, a
mhm,
Jewish characteristic state in a piece of land that just physically does not have a Jewish majority right now,
mhm,
you're essentially implying at least one of three things: apartheid, genocide, or ethnic cleansing. And in reality, all three are happening right now as we speak.
mhm.
That's what Israel from the river to the sea means. That's not what Palestinians gaining freedom and liberation between the river and the sea means. Even still, and I again explicitly called it out, explicitly explained that even still that comment was not found to be in violation of any policy.
So that sort of campaign against you, like, do you have a sense of how that was organized?
I wish I knew. I think that there is this group called Jews at Microsoft,
Mhm.
which is again it's an employee network.
Is that sort of
Same,
equivalent to PAM? It's like for
same
Jewish.
classification as spam, yeah, and I think it's more aptly called Zionists at Microsoft, because they were actually very hostile towards other Jewish people who were not aligned with their Zionist ideology. I think that's where a lot of the sort of above board organizing was happening. I'm sure there was more insidious stuff happening as well. Just as the simple
Mhm.
evidence of that is like, for example, my firing was leaked to this doxxing group, Stop Anti-Semitism, before I was even notified that I was fired, an
Mm.
hour and a half before. So there must have been some sort of either
Really
high
interesting.
level.
Did Microsoft investigate that?
They claimed that they did and that they were going to tell people about the results of it, and then, I mean, we're 7 months later, 8 months later, no word
Mm.
on that either.
Must have been very difficult. Maybe they couldn't figure it out.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So there's a real parallel here, and I think it's true not just with no tech for apartheid, but at Google, this is the exact same thing that they talked about. So they had this employee resource group called Juglers, which had I think about 4,000 members, and anti-Zionist Jews were not welcome, and were sort of like, I don't know if kicked out is the right word, but were certainly made feel unwelcome. And then that was one of the major tools of organizing, sort of like weaponizing this Jewish tool
Mhm.
for Israel, and for Zionism and Jews who were against, I mean, not necessarily against Israel, but were against the sort of the actions of the Israeli of the Israeli state, the Israeli army, the genocide, the ethnic cleansing, were were attacked by by the same people weaponizing that kind of anti-Semitism. And it's sort of an interesting one how often I've seen talking to worker groups or talking to workers how Jewish employee resource groups were weaponized in that manner.
Yeah, it's. I mean, yeah, I think it's almost like you got so used to it happening that I didn't even think to like. It felt so
It's
obvious to me,
so
but
absurd.
it's
Like,
yeah, it is, and it's that sort of language is also. It's not just weaponized. I think like not just by talking to leaders or like lobbying in that way, but there is a few very vocal people in that group who would just go and like actually harass these people in real life. Like I know people who were like monitoring my Instagram stories or writing comments on my like posts and stuff like that. And I know these are people who work for Microsoft.
mhm,
And I'm sure there is. I mean, the I'm sure there is some link to like that Stop Anti-Semitism account because they did also make a profile about me in May.
mhm,
So a few months before I was fired, and they explicitly had a sentence that said like Microsoft workers are like sick of him or something like that,
mhm,
and that was so out of context for like what they were actually saying about me because it was all about my involvement in protests and that sort of thing. So
mhm,
it felt like that felt like it was written by somebody who either works for Microsoft or like by somebody who like had a connection to somebody who works on Microsoft.
mhm,
And obviously there's the leak after that. So that's and that sort of weaponization like is happening. I mean, I'm speaking on my personal experience, but that happens all the time against everybody who speaks about Palestine. A few people who work at Microsoft, including people who still work there right now, have been doxxed in that way and have been targeted in that way. A few people were targeted formally within the company with HR investigations and that sort of thing. Uh, some of it that even were forced to quit over it. I know one person at least who he works in LinkedIn, and from what I hear, their HR is even more vicious than general Microsoft is.
mhm.
Uh, so he was essentially kind of given an option to like either take severance and leave, or he was going to get fired, and he decided to take the severance. Um, that's not, it's really vicious sometimes,
Mhm.
unfortunately.
So, I mean, I kind of understand why it's vicious because at a certain level, like Microsoft has allowed itself to become complicit in crimes against humanity.
Yeah.
And maybe they didn't intend to do that, right? At some point, they're just like, we like selling cloud and governments buy cloud. But like the state that they're at now, I mean, I don't know if there's necessarily a situation where Satya Nadella could be sent to the Hague, for example.
Mhm.
But reputationally, we all know that that IBM took part in the Holocaust, right? Like that's a thing that everyone in the tech industry knows. IBM has that reputational damage stuck, and so they're now at this situation where it's not just what they've done internally, but we
Mhm.
actually know a lot about what Microsoft. I mean, through your work, right? We know a lot about what Microsoft's actual complicity is,
Yeah.
and so it starts to look really dangerous. But I would actually love, we haven't done this yet. Can you run us through what kind of things have you publicly exposed about Microsoft's, direct involvement in it?
Yeah, so we've come to learn a lot more since we launched our campaign, including from public, stories that have come out, investigations that have been done through leaks and through interviews from Microsoft, from the Israeli side, in AP News, Dropsite News, The Guardian, and Plus 972, and basically what that reveals is like, to summarize, Microsoft has a major footprint in all technological infrastructure in the Israeli military. Microsoft is was before Project Nimbus was signed, was the main cloud provider for the Israeli government and the Israeli military. And it appears that at least for the most sensitive and the most confidential workloads, they are still the most trusted cloud provider, specifically for the Israeli military. They are Azure helps run combat and intelligence activities, to use their words. Um, it includes specific units, so not just the Israeli military, which is even more specific than something like Project Nimbus, which is for the entire government, but specific units in the Israeli military, including naval, air, and ground units, uh, including the units responsible for the target bank, including the Rolling Stone system, which is the Palestinian population registry, and it helps in the targeting systems as well. Microsoft storage, 13.6 petabytes of them are used to store data that's collected through illegal mass surveillance of Palestinians. Microsoft is complicit also in the apartheid system by there's this app called Al Munassiq, which Palestinians have to use to manage the permits to enter and leave the West Bank. And that is also used to collect massive amounts of surveillance on the Palestinians, and that runs on Azure. Microsoft even sells technology and directly to illegal settlements in the West Bank. Uh, and specifically when it comes to Gaza, I think there is Microsoft is also selling technology to Mamram, which is this tech and computing unit in the Israeli military that is most likely responsible for the targeting systems that we know of, Lavender, the Gospel, Where is Daddy, those sort of automated genocide systems that, according to reports, have allowed the Israeli military to accelerate their genocide so much in Gaza that in the time it used to take them to authorize one strike, they can now authorize 200, simply by the power of AI. So I think it's fair to say, and this is through the words of Israeli military officials themselves, like Rachel Dubinsky, who's the commander of this Mamram unit in the Israeli military. She was on the record. She was quoted as saying that according to them, according to her unit, they consider cloud to be a weapon in its own right,
Mm-hmm.
and they say that so-called civilian cloud like Microsoft, Google, and Amazon have allowed them very significant operational effectiveness in Gaza, and that their own systems would not have been able to keep up with the increase in their demand for storage and computing after the what they call the war. Um, so they had to resort to these civilian systems. And there is basically only those three companies on the globe who
Mm-hmm.
could provide the sort of on demand scalability and capacity that they needed and they wanted after October 7. Storage capacity, processing power, but also AI, because
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft is also selling, you know, their own like AI services to the Israeli military, including because of the partnership with OpenAI, including OpenAI models and GPT-4 to the Israeli military. Their usage spiked, I think, 200 times, not 200%, 200 times between October and March
Mm-hmm.
2023 to March 2024. So it's clear, that there is a correlation between the increase in the operations in Gaza and the increase in AI usage, and we know what the Israeli military uses AI for. So, if it was not for those three companies, the Israeli military would not have been as destructive in
Mm-hmm.
Gaza as they have been. Uh, and I agree with the analysis of the head of Mamram that in this day and age, cloud and AI are weapons. They
Mm-hmm.
are the bombs and bullets of the 21st century, of the world of the first AI assisted genocide. And as a result, I think Microsoft should be seen as effectively a weapons manufacturer.
Mm-hmm.
And we should be calling the same way that now there's increasing global calls for an arms embargo on
Mm-hmm.
Israel. There should be a digital arms embargo on Israel to make sure they don't get these AI and cloud technologies they need to accelerate their genocide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, when we look at the occupation, like long before the invasion of Gaza, long before the this specific iteration of the genocide started, Israel had, really weaponized automation,
Yeah,
um, to enable their apartheid. The degree to which Israel has like full domination, over Palestinians, and full sort of like technical domination, and that they like, they make the lives of Palestinians so shitty in order to enable that. So, for example, in Gaza, they only had 2G, right?
yeah,
In the West Bank, they only have 3G. Part of, while, in the West Bank, their Jewish neighbors, and I literally mean the people across the street in the settlements, have full 5G. Palestinians are restricted to this because of this need um, for this sort of total surveillance state, total dominant state. And when you see that, leveling up in the way that it did after October 7th, when Israel decided to invade, when Israel, in this sort of like, just real fury, right? There was this sort of moment of vengeance, and we'll do whatever the hell we can. I don't think that there was ever a moment that that Microsoft could not have predicted what was going to happen. And
yeah,
today, it's just, I mean, they're saying we're doing ethnic cleansing out loud.
yeah.
And Microsoft still continues to say, oh, yeah, please use our services for your, the join our ethnic cleansing cloud.
Yeah. I 100% agree, and I think this is actually a broader trend that is happening right now, where it's almost like some people are now starting to flock away from Israel, and there is this growing consensus that Israel is committing genocide, that Israel is committing ethnic cleansing, and people are saying like, oh yeah, like now we see it, like now we realize Israel is doing this, like that wasn't as clear in the fog of war or whatever,
Yeah.
and that sort of thing, and it was exceptionally clear. Like on October 8th, it was exceptionally clear what Israel intended to do. They have said some of their most genocidal statements in October 2023, and their consistent and incessant targeting of all aspects of civilian life in Gaza, of bakeries, of schools, of hospitals, of mosques, of refugee camps, and the subsequent lying and gaslighting about how and why they're targeting these people. They were caught red-handed in so many lies way before. I mean, there's this one that keeps coming back now, on like the 15 paramedics that were found,
Mm-hmm.
and how that was like caught blatantly in a lie. Way before that, if you go all the way back to Al Shifa Hospital and like the
Mm-hmm.
multiple raids on Al Shifa Hospital, people forget they had these like
The killing of
3D
Hijab.
CG. Yeah, exactly, Hind Rajab. And they had this like 3D CGI renderings of these imagined tunnels under Al Shifa Hospital. And then
Right.
they invaded Al Shifa and they had nothing to show for it. Like
Mm-hmm.
they just had like some
Calendar.
random duffel bags with a few weapons next to an MRI machine, and they were like, okay, we found evidence that this is like a Hamas thing. Um, so everybody knew.
Mhm.
Everybody in Western media, Western companies, Western tech companies, politicians, everybody was complicit in manufacturing consent for
Mhm.
what they knew was going to be a genocidal ethnic cleansing campaign. Uh,
So
some people
given,
might now try to whitewash that, but it
yeah,
was exceptionally clear. But yeah,
so given that we actually want them to stop doing this thing, there there needs to be some sort of like exit ramp for the people
yeah,
who are participating, like Microsoft. And obviously we want to hold people accountable, but we would also like to stop.
yeah.
So what is that off ramp for Microsoft? How does Microsoft assuming that they woke up on the good side of the bed today and said, we're not going to be evil anymore, or, at least we think we're going to lose money if we keep
Yeah.
being evil in this particular situation. What is their path to actually
Mhm.
getting out of this?
Yeah, I think Microsoft have actually given themselves, I mean, to their credit, have given this as a pretty easy off ramp at this point because of their statement that they released on Nakba Day this year. So on May 15, about a few weeks ago, um, there's a few things that are very significant about the statement. Number one, I think it was the first official acknowledgement of our campaign of any sorts since we launched, and that was alone a testament to the effectiveness of our sustained pressure, that it was untenable. They had to say something about it, at least something they can reference when people keep asking them and badgering them about it. Number two is that they made a series of really damning confessions. They admitted to providing Israel with AI, cloud storage, with cloud and AI services in general. They admitted to that, and that IMOD, the Israeli Ministry of Defense, is one of their customers. They've admitted that they provided uh, support beyond the use of their normal terms of service after October 7, justifying it by saying that it's to
Hostage.
rescue hostages. Yeah, and they admitted that they do not have visibility into how their technology is used on premises. If it's like used on Israeli servers, they don't know how that is used, even if they claim that they have found no evidence
Hmm.
that it's used to harm people. So there's a lot of really damning confessions here, but ultimately, one thing it does, and I think that is significant, is that it concedes the premise. It concedes the premise that if Microsoft technology was used in harming people, then that would be inconsistent with Microsoft values. That would be inconsistent with Microsoft statements, inconsistent with Microsoft policies. That is different than the route that, let's say, Google has taken, where they have just completely removed that language from their policies altogether.
Hmm.
So I think it's, if I was Microsoft, it's and I wanted an off ramp, it's very easy for me to come out tomorrow and say, actually, we've done further investigation, and now we have found evidence that our technology is being used in that way, and therefore we're not going to do that anymore.
Hmm.
Or they could say, because we don't have visibility into how our technology is being used, if it's on premises, that's then not enough due diligence to actually know
Hmm.
if our technology is being used in that way or not. And because this army is, plausibly accused of genocide, and they are committing war crimes, that we don't want the chance of being
Right, right,
involved in
right.
war crimes. So we're gonna stop selling it. So
So they could take, like, literally, you know, tomorrow there will be a new thing that is announced that is a crime against humanity, and they could say, that's it, that's our thing too far. We have realized that we don't have the visibility to prove that we're not upholding our own standards, so we're out.
yeah, and I think that there will have, unfortunately, and it truly pains me to say this, but I think there will be no shortage of events like that where they could
Mm.
draw the line in the sand and be like, this is it.
Yeah,
Uh, I think for example, we're all anticipating the release of Francesca Albanese's report
yeah,
on the businesses that are complicit in furthering the genocide. Uh, at Noah, we submitted a proposal
yeah.
about
Well,
Microsoft. Yeah, a long time ago. Microsoft has since been added as a BDS priority target. Um, so I think once that is released, and hopefully, I think Microsoft, among most uh, major tech companies, there's a good chance they will be on that report. That could be it. Could be like, hey, this is the UN telling us that we're doing something wrong.
I mean, the thing that I think Microsoft and also the other tech companies have to realize that they will eventually drop Israel. Like, they think that they can just keep making money, but the truth is that, like, what Israel has done is so far beyond. There may have been an idea of, like, oh, we can ride this through, and
Yeah.
we can Israel will stop. There'll be a ceasefire, and we can continue making money. I think Israel has dispelled all notions that this is going to stop by any means. And so, like, if Microsoft is still attached when the actual ethnic cleansing, and I mean more like the what they're calling it, the Trump plan of removing every Palestinian from Gaza, right?
Yeah.
If Microsoft is still involved, then like there will presumably be some line that becomes so far that they will have to actually do it. So the thing is, there's no money for them, right? At the end of the day, they're not, they're going to drop that contract, they're going to lose that money. It's just a question of like, how much do they destroy their reputation en route to doing that?
Yeah, and I think that is bestowing a little bit more foresight and intelligence on Microsoft executives than I think they actually possess when it comes to this. Because like thinking about it this way, like the they would want to be the first company to pull out. They would want to be the first company to say like,
Mm-hmm.
history will not remember us as the ones that are complicit in the Holocaust because we were the first to pull out. Actually, you guys were just late to the party. Um, and they just that would be it, like that would still not exonerate them actually
Of course
from
not.
their
No, no,
complicity
no.
so far.
Yeah.
But if I was to make like an actually financially economically wise decision right now, that's what I would do, because I think Zionism is a sinking ship at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they have that foresight, and I also think frankly, just from the politics game, the Trump effect is so real. I think affecting all these companies. I think uh, seeing what's going on with Harvard, for example, which also, by the way, does not exonerate them either. Separate conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but just
Well,
seeing
I
how
think it's a
far,
really good
yeah,
example though, because Harvard learned that despite bending over backwards to do everything it
yeah,
possibly could to placate Israel and Zionists, they still got screwed. And like I think companies are sort of, will need to learn the same lesson, that they will be between such an incredible rock and a hard place at some point, that, and then when they pull out, it won't, they won't have any friends from the people that they stayed on their side this whole time.
I think that's very true. Once they become a target, I think um, I think the thinking right now, especially for a company like Microsoft, they don't like any press whatsoever.
Hmm.
So I think their goal is probably like, I just want to fly under the radar. I don't want to ruffle any feathers. I don't want to like become a target of the Trump administration. If they do become a target like the way Columbia and Harvard did, I think maybe that's an argument to be made there, like you said, of like conceding is not the prudent option. Um, and but I think just seeing the length that he's willing to go, targeting somebody like Harvard, who in reality conceded to the vast majority of their demands.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, I think I imagine is also having some kind of fear, like element on these executives. Again, not to exonerate them from the morality of the question, but I think that probably factors into their economic calculation. But I think what we are doing though is making sure that by staying under the radar, that is still ruffling feathers, right? That is not a comfortable place to be. That is not a quiet, press-free place to be, right? And I think they are feeling that pressure, and this is why they felt like they had
Hmm.
to publish that statement.
I mean, the thing for me is like, trying to put myself in the shoes of Satya Nadella, right? The guy's worth, I don't know, it's 100 million, 500 million. I don't know, right? More money than God, and he chooses every day to get up and be the guy who, was IBM in the Holocaust.
Yeah,
He could just go home, right? Spend time with your kids, like just stop
yeah,
doing that. And instead, he chooses to continue doing it. And I would love to see him, in front of the ICC.
yeah.
I don't know if we're ever going to see this level of complicity being brought to actual war crimes. But I mean, as you say, right? They are a weapons company participating in a genocide. The complicity level there is out of control. And if it does not forever stain his reputation, I will be shocked.
I agree, and I think it will be. I think, like you said, Microsoft's legacy will be their participation in the genocide. It will not be Windows or Office or even something as important as Teams. It will be it will be this genocide.
Hmm.
Um, And I actually wouldn't put it past it that we might actually see these executives by name be tried in The Hague. There was actually this Soma opinion. I'm not a legal expert, but I think that there was like some UN legal opinion that said that like actually as individuals, the executives of these tech companies can be tried for their complicity or for their enablement of these human rights violations and these war crimes in Palestine. Um, I think once the ICJ convicts Israel of genocide, which I think is
Mhm.
very likely at this point, um, we might start to see movements in that direction. I don't know, if, frankly, because of the protection of the US provides.
I mean, yeah,
I don't
sure,
know.
they'll never
Yeah,
go. But
but I think they at least there could be a world in which they are in a similar position to Netanyahu is today.
all right, well, Hossam Nasr, thank you so much for coming on. No Azure for Apartheid. We'll have links to all the socials and the campaign in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure chatting.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a great time.
At Palestine Deep Dive, we're on the front lines, producing fearless, independent journalism that exposes the systems enabling occupation, apartheid, and the rise of digital surveillance state which threatens us all. We can't do this alone. We rely on your support to keep going. To keep challenging power and exposing the truth, please join us by becoming a subscriber for just £2 a month at palestinedeepdive.com/support. Let's build something powerful together.